what would you want to ask an ex-CIA operative?
We must stop the terror.
Taking this individual out means the next 9/11 is not going to happen.
As the public, have we come closer than ever without knowing to some of these attacks that the CIA have stopped?
Yeah. I had this one instance that was just nuts.
I am so excited about today's interview because you guys know I'm a bit of a true crime buff. Like, I'm a bit of a sicko for anything true crime. I grew up watching on repeat, like all the CIA shows, all the FBI shows, even, X-Files, I don't think that counts. But I watched it all and I loved it all. So that is why I'm so excited to introduce Brittany Butler today. Now, Brittany spent 9 years as a targeting officer within the CIA's Directorate of Operations Counterterrorism Center, both at Langley and on temporary assignments in the Middle East. Brittany spearheaded operational efforts to achieve some of the most sensitive foreign intelligence objectives abroad. She has both first-hand knowledge of targeting methodologies used in the recruitment of spies and extensive field experience in working with foreign liaisons to discover and apprehend terrorists abroad. What a mouthful that is, but I'm so excited. Brittany, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. This is such a treat.
I'm so excited because we have never had anyone like you on the podcast before. But like everyone else who joins the podcast, we start every interview by asking if you have an accidentally unfiltered story, your most embarrassing story.
Yeah, so I think this is probably one of my crazier moments working at the CIA. So I started dating my now husband, then boyfriend, probably about a year after I started working in the Counterterrorism Center in the Iraq department. And we did this kind of absurd thing at Christmas time called the 12 Rays of Christmas. And everybody had to do some kind of like baked good that symbolized an operation that they were part of, a successful operation. And at that time, I was targeting an individual that was on Interpol's Most Wanted. And so there were lots of like unclassified photos of him out there. And so I was part of an operation that led to his demise, right? So I had to do a baked good that symbolized this.
So random.
Which is like really gross and bizarre if you look back at it. So I had his face screamed onto a cake at Harris Teeter, as a grocery store here. And my boyfriend, now husband, went into the refrigerator in the middle of the night to get water out, and he saw this huge cake, and he didn't know what I did for a living. And it was a huge cake with this dude on it. And he was like, what is this guy? Like, what are you doing? Like, what is going on? So I tried to play it off like it was like a joke on a coworker, like not a big deal.
It's definitely not a terrorist.
Yeah. And then like later on, I was like, yeah, that was like a terrorist we were hunting. And he's like, oh my God, you guys are so weird.
I feel like only the CIA is going to like have a baked goods store with terrorist face on it. Like, never ever would you hear something like that.
Was he tasty?
Yeah. It was tasty. It was so good. Yeah, no, this was a really bad dude. Like, he was really bad. He killed a lot of innocent civilians. So like, I didn't feel bad about it, but I just know that like saying that out loud now, I'm like, wow, like that seems like so bizarre. But yeah, we had the 12 Rays of Christmas party at the CIA and the counterterrorism unit.
But I do wonder, and maybe that's something we'll get into, I do wonder if you hear this a lot with really traumatic situations or really serious situations where people do things where they joke a lot or they make light of situations because, if everything's always doom and gloom. And I wonder if that's something with what you guys were experiencing when you're day in and day out, I can only imagine, is some pretty horrific scenes that maybe that is your way of sort of getting through the day.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's a really good analysis, I think, of the situation. Like, whenever I was deployed overseas, I worked in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so at the embassy, we had bars set up and we joked around a lot and we drank beers and because the work was so intense and so all consuming, you needed that release because life was scary a lot of the time. And, you had rocket attacks at that time and you would, be duck and cover and the sirens would be going off and everything. So yeah, you have to do those things to make a little bit light of the situation for sure.
Absolutely. That makes complete sense to me. But Brittany, what was it that made you want to join the CIA? Were you a little girl who was like, you saw a movie or something and you went, that's what I want to do one day? Or were you a grown-up who found your way?
Yeah, no, not at all. So I thought I wanted to be a foreign service officer. And I told this story to some of my girlfriends the other day, and they thought it was like so absurd. They like could not even believe it was true. So my mom had me in beauty pageants. I don't know if you guys have those in Australia.
We don't, but we know what they are.
We know what they are thanks to you guys.
Sorry, we do, but I don't think they're the same. Yeah, I don't think they're as
they're not on the level.
Performative, yeah.
Okay. Well, in the US, at least, like they're really big in the South, and they were a little ridiculous. But one good thing that did come out of it was they asked me as part of like Miss Freshman or whatever for my high school, what do you want to be when you grow up? And it made me really think about this question seriously. And I always knew I wanted to travel. And so I had two kind of like job avenues that I was pursuing. I'm like, okay, if I do really well in college, I want to be a foreign service officer and work for the State Department. And basically those are the individuals that go and work at our embassies abroad. Or if that doesn't work out, I don't do well, I want to be like a flight attendant or something, just so I can get out and see things. So it was not on my radar, the CIA at all. But I did an internship at the American Embassy in Paris my junior year of college. And I wanted to be a foreign service officer. So I was kind of doing this internship as like a trial to see like what I thought about it and how I did. And I knew it would look really good on a job application, of course, to actually do an internship with the State Department. Well, I was involved in some passport fraud cases, and this is back in like 2004. I'm aging myself quite a bit, but we were very much like concerned about who was coming in and out of the country pretty soon after 9/11. And I had some knowledge of Arabic naming conventions, and I was able to pinpoint an individual that was trying to get into the country that really shouldn't be. And I didn't know it at the time, but there were some CIA operatives working at the embassy undercover, and they heard about like that I had made this identification, and they approached me and they're like, have you ever thought about applying to the CIA? And I was like, absolutely not. It was never even my radar, but they're like, just give it a try, like apply on the website. So I did, and I was recruited to be a case officer right out of college, which is basically like in the Directorate of Operations, which is like a division of the CIA that does all the recruiting and handling of spies. They're the ones that recruit and handle spies. And so, yeah, I went through that process and did the full psyche evals, polygraphs. They did the full background investigation, all that good stuff. The more I kind of got involved in that line of work, I realized, you know what, I really think that like a hybrid position would be better for me where I'm not working full time overseas. I wasn't really ready to commit to that at that time in my life because it pigeonholes you quite a bit in terms of, I was in my early 20s and I was like wanting to get married and, you know, all that stuff. So I was like, okay, I want to like be able to like live in the US and, but you know, TDY abroad, which is like our term for like temporary duty assignment overseas. So yeah, that's how I got into it.
Was the application process, the recruitment process really difficult? We think that it's this really hardcore recruitment process that, you know, like 1% of the people get into. What was it like?
Yeah, it is. It is quite hard. So it's interesting that you asked that question because I've gotten like some really ridiculous comments on social media, especially from men. They're like, there's no way you were in the CIA. You're pretty. Like why? Like they only hire average looking, like smart people. And I'm like, just because I'm pretty, like I'm therefore unqualified. Like what?
Or I'm not intelligent enough just because I have looks.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I can't pass test. No. Yeah. It is a very difficult process. There's standardized testing. They do IQ tests. You obviously have to have really good grades. In college, I was a bit of a nerd in college and I had like, you know, straight A's, and I was in the student government. I was the president of my class. Like I was pretty straight laced in school. And of course, like a big part of it too is, you know, the lifestyle. They want to make sure that they're not recruiting people that are, you know, like into drugs and alcohol a whole bunch. So I had never tried pot. I had never tried any of that stuff. It just wasn't my jam. Like I said, I was like the nerd in the library. So like, I think it rolls a lot of people out, honestly, given that the standards are so high in terms of like, your moral code of conduct and your ability to also like withstand a lot of stress. So not everyone can operate successfully in that environment where you are dealing with life or death situations every day, that you have so much pressure on you. You know, it's not for everybody. You know, some people are more inclined to resort to drugs and alcohol than others. And I think that, you know, just like in doing a background investigation on, you know, their employees, they try to distill kind of the candidates that they feel like are going to be the most successful in the environment. So not only do you have to have the academic background, and then the foreign languages too. So I speak foreign languages, which I picked up in college and study abroad and working abroad, demonstrating an aptitude for foreign language skills. If you know one foreign language, you know, they feel like you're more inclined to be able to speak and learn other foreign languages. Yeah, they thought that was good.
What languages do you speak?
French and a little bit of Arabic.
Oh, amazing.
What did you tell people in your life at the time? Did you tell your parents, hey guys, guess what? Just got a job at the CIA.
So when I first told my dad, he didn't believe me. He was like, what? How can you be getting into this line of work? So he was in the DIA, which is the Department of Defense's intelligence organization. And he did like weapon systems, computer science type of work during the Cold War. So he helped to design some computer programs, and you could talk about him, you know, up until he passed away, but like about how you identify people using technology that are working on certain weapon systems in foreign countries. And so he worked on that computer program, and this is a long story, but I'll try to cut it short. But basically, like, the program was cut short because of bureaucracy, and he got really mad, and he was like, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm leaving Washington. I'm going to go buy an 18-wheeler truck. I'm going to drive across the country and, you know, take produce from one side to the other. And I want nothing to do with Washington. So when he heard I was being recruited by the CIA, he was like, I cannot believe this. Like, you cannot go to Washington. Everyone is corrupt. Stay far away from that kind of bureaucracy. And I was like, no. I want to do this. I feel compelled to do this. I was passionate about the counterterrorism mission in particular. And so, yeah, I signed up. And then also, you know, because of the background check, they go to every place you've ever lived, and they interview like at least 5 or 6 people.
Wow.
So when, you know, the government people roll in and they're black, unmarked cars and suits, and they're talking to my parents, and they're talking to my parents' friends, and everything. Like, people know that you're probably doing some kind of government work. But I tried to, as a general rule, they tell you just try to sound as boring as possible or as dumb as possible, like, so that people are just not interested in what you have to do. So, like, if I was like out at a bar and like talking to people, I'd be like, I'm in IT consulting. Like, I don't know. Like, I just.
Because no one wants to ask
right,
you questions
whatever.
on IT consultancy. Everyone's like, oh my God.
I think that's kind of one of the reasons too, like, why I was recruited. They don't want anyone that looks like a spy, because then you see them coming like 100 miles away. Like, and they also want people that are personable. If you're like hanging out your trench coat with like a hat on and you're like swirly. I mean, there are those people that are there, but they're usually like analysts. They're not recruiting spies. They're not trying to get people to trust them. They need people with people skills that can, you know, have conversations and get people comfortable and get people to open up about secrets. Right.
This conversation is already taking so many avenues that I want to go down. Like, I'm dying to ask you, but let's just start. What actually is a targeting officer? So you were part of the Counterterrorism Center. What was your role as a targeting officer?
So I did targeting, right, for counterterrorism operations, and that involves doing targeting to help pinpoint individuals that would be good for our recruitment efforts. So people that could be potential spies. So helping to outline for the field and kind of present to the field, like our stations and bases overseas. This individual has the right access. They have the right vulnerabilities. This is how I see this approach going. This is how to contact this individual. I've done the vetting on him. I've seen through our different tools and databases that he does have the access that he proclaims to have. I think we should target him, right? So targeting officer, target him for recruitment. Another kind of targeting work, which was done primarily whenever we were in, you know, Iraq and Afghanistan, was targeting for high value targets. So like individuals like members of Al Qaeda that, were responsible for killing innocent civilians. And so part of those efforts to target those individuals and help to provide the operational leads to our folks in the field, whether that be special forces we worked really closely with, or like with our drone program.
I'm going to struggle not kind of jumping around, but we will get into a little bit more about your book. But the characters in the book that you wrote about, there was one in particular who, and I don't want to give too much away for anyone who's going to read it, but it's the best friend of the main character. And the story that kind of plays out between these women is that there's a moment where the main character isn't sure whether she can trust the source, trust the best friend. Is that something that as a targeting officer you dealt with a lot? I guess I'm asking, did you learn how to spot what you could trust in someone? Or were you always doubtful of the fact that
they could be playing you?
Yeah, they could be someone who was working for an opposing side or could be giving you false information.
Yeah, absolutely. That's always something that you worry about in that line of work, is if someone is lying to you or not, or if their motivations make sense and working with you. So I think that's part of the vetting process before you even recruit a source. So they're called something called a developmental, and they stay at a developmental for quite some time, where you are constantly trying to corroborate or find another source of information to corroborate what they're saying to you, as proving that they're being truthful or proving that they're a liar. And then we have all sorts of tools to do that. So one of them, of course, is all the intelligence that we have and all the databases that we have to corroborate information that we're getting from other sources. Another piece is the polygraph, right? We use the polygraph not just to get the truth out, but to see if someone is more inclined to be nervous, getting hooked up to all that stuff, and has something to hide. Yeah, it's interesting what happens under pressure for people who are not telling the truth. And you start to pick up on nonverbal cues, of course, but then we have different tools in our toolbox to say, listen, I know you're not telling the truth about this. And as the CIA, I think there's a certain amount of credibility we have that we kind of know everything. And so you bring that power with you to an operational meeting and say, listen, I know what you're saying is not true. And I think that it is hard as an officer in that organization not to carry those skills over into your personal life and dealing with interactions with everyday people. I try not to do it, but I could definitely pick up on if there's a girlfriend that's not being truthful or, not acting on the up and up. I feel like I could pick up on that pretty quickly.
Your kids must have such a hard time. I lied to my parents about sneaking out and you'd be
straight away, it's just bullshit, sit down, I'm hooking you up to the lie detector test.
Yeah.
Brittany, what are some of the things that you look for? What are some of the things that you look for to spot whether someone is lying?
Well, you need to baseline them first. So understanding how they talk and how they act and what their mannerisms are whenever they're telling the truth. And then you ask them a question in which you know the correct answer, and then you see if they're going to lie about it, and then you think they might lie about it, and watch how they respond. I haven't done that to anyone besides my kids. My almost 13-year-old son, he was a lot of it's common sense, honestly. He told me the other day, oh yeah, I did not say a cuss word. And I said, well, I've heard that you did say a cuss word. So if you need to tell me the truth right now. I have cameras all over this house, which is not true. I don't have cameras inside the house, but I have them on the outside. So I was I have cameras and I watch everything you do. So you better tell me right now. So you can choose. You can either right now fess up to the fact that you said this cuss word and you'll be on restriction for just 1 week from video games. But if you lie to me and I watch the video and it's showing that you cut your cussing, you're off video games for a whole month. And he was I cuss. And he was did you just do your CIA thing on me? And I was no, kind of.
I mean, a little bit.
A little bit.
A huge part of your job in counterterrorism, you were on the ground in Afghanistan, but you are trying to gain such sensitive information that's going to thwart these attacks. And a part of that, I imagine, is forming relationships and a lot of trust. And I have heard you speaking about this, about trying to form these relationships with sources and offering them protection. You know, we are going to look after you. You are going to be okay if you do this for us. But that's not always true, is it?
No. And I think that's probably the hardest part of the job is, I mean, we do that. I keep on saying we, I'm not part of the CIA anymore. So I don't speak for them. It's just my own experiences, which are that there was a very high threshold for someone to be relocated, to be taken out of a dangerous situation. So by a high threshold, I mean like their reporting has to be like at a really high level, the head of whatever ABC organization is. And taking this individual out means the next 9/11 is not going to happen, because I think it has stuff to do with the resources available. I hate that's such a bureaucratic answer, but I think that's just the reality of the situation. We just simply could not afford to like relocate every source that ever worked for us. But yeah, it's really difficult work to do. It's work that needs to be done. I want to be really careful because I have friends that are currently doing this work, and it's so dangerous and it's so honorable of them to be working, alongside these individuals to help protect our country, the suicide bombers, and they want the same thing to happen. So, we're working with them, in many ways we were empowering them to be able to stop those individuals because they didn't have the manpower or the resources to stop terrorism within their own country.
In your career, was there ever a time that you feared for your life?
Yeah, definitely. In the war zones, I was quite scared a couple times. But, whenever I worked in the war zones, the U.S. was occupying those countries. So I was really surrounded by a lot of U.S. military. I always had guards with me on any kind of operational act I was doing. So I always felt very safe then. Probably the scariest situation I was in another Middle Eastern country that the U.S. was not occupying. And we were working with an Arab intelligence service. And we were meeting with an individual that I helped to identify as a very high penetration of a terrorist network. It was very scary because you walk into those high threat meetings, the initial meetings, not knowing if they're going to show up with a bomb strapped to their chest. And that happened to some very close friends of mine. There was an attack at a CIA base in Khost, Afghanistan, that killed 8 of our officers. And the source showed up with a bomb strapped to his chest. And I worked with 2 of those officers in this Middle Eastern country right before that happened to them. So yeah, you're always worried about that. You could do all the research, all of the background investigation you can on a source, but at the end of the day, you're meeting with a terrorist. You're meeting with somebody that has access, to these really bad guys. And so you have to be prepared. That being said, there are security protocols in place to protect our officers. And as long as those security protocols are followed through, everybody should be safe in that meeting.
Something I think we hear all the time as the public is, oh, you don't know how close you are to an attack. You don't know how many things that have been stopped right before they happened. And I never know if that is just a scare tactic or how close we all have been to something happening. What are the statistics like of that, if you can tell us? Like, as the public, have we come closer than ever without knowing to some of these attacks that the CIA have stopped?
Yeah. I think, I don't have the numbers for you. And if I did, I couldn't say what those are. But I know I've been a part of thwarting attacks. And so I can say for, certain that, that we have thwarted many attacks.
Wow.
But, something that I feel like people don't really understand about the CIA is like when you work there, you don't have access to everything the CIA does. Like, it's not like you're read into every single program. Like the director of the CIA is, but you're not. So you are responsible for one little area and you need to know everything about that area. And that's your job. As far as like knowing what's going on in China and Russia and like what those threats are to the US, that wasn't my job. And, of course I would read like the morning reports or whatever that would come out, the analysts would do, and they would brief the president on. Sometimes I could read some of those reports depending upon what I was working on, if that was involved in that. But we have something at the CIA called a need to know. And if you didn't have a need to know it, you weren't going to learn it.
It's not like water cooler chat. You don't just all, hey, what's happening over in Russia? This is what's happening in Afghanistan. Yeah, it's not like that.
No. And you're very closely monitored there. Like you don't want to step out of line.
There are cameras inside there, unlike your house.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Not like my house. There are cameras there. Yeah. Well, just like they monitor things that you're doing on your computer. And yeah, if you're like chatting with your buddy about something you're not supposed to.
I'm very interested about the collaboration between the CIA and other forms of, I guess, policing or the FBI. Like, how much do you work together and how much do you go, that's for us and not for you?
Yeah, so FBI's jurisdiction is much different from the CIA. So the FBI is responsible for everything domestically, so like everything internal to the United States. The CIA, our jurisdiction is overseas. So I had this question come up as it pertained to the recent assassination attempt on former President Trump. As everybody was coming out of the woodwork being like, what's your opinion about this? Like, how could this happen? Blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, CIA doesn't have anything to do with that unless it's in a foreign country. Now, if Trump was in Europe or in the Middle East or Asia or whatever, then the CIA would have something to do with that because they'd be in charge of working with the FBI and the Secret Service. And again, the Secret Service is like a whole other government organization that is ultimately in charge of the president's security. We would be working with them in tandem to make sure that any potential threats to the president are being mitigated. But because that's not our jurisdiction, like we didn't have anything to do with that, what happened with the Trump assassination. So yeah, I mean, one of the big things that came out of the 9/11 Commission report was the collaboration between FBI and CIA wasn't happening very well. I guess, you know, a lot of what was being learned by the CIA overseas about Osama bin Laden, about how far along he was in the planning process, wasn't being communicated to the federal level and then back down into the local and state level. So what I would hope has happened, and I certainly saw this happening a lot, was more collaboration between the CIA and FBI. Like if there is a threat to the homeland, we're going to let our FBI counterparts know about it. And if we don't, we get in big trouble, you know, for obvious reasons. But, you know, that being said, we have a duty to protect our sources and methods so that we don't, you know, reveal our sources to people who shouldn't know. Because the more people that know the true identity of our sources, the more at risk they are. And so we're responsible for protecting their lives. So we take that very seriously. So distilling the information, making sure it gets to the right people is definitely done. But it's kind of like we strip out a lot of the, you know, where do we get this from and who is the source and blah, blah, blah.
Speaking of Donald Trump's attempted assassination, I'd kick myself for not asking your opinion on this as someone that was once on the inside. Do you have a view, knowing how it all works, knowing what the security level would have been like, knowing that it just skimmed his ear, he jumped straight up, he fist pumped, he didn't run off, like the whole scenario? There's a lot of theories going around about maybe it's been an inside job. It just played out almost seamlessly. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. I don't understand why there's all these conspiracy theories when, like, honestly, I think it comes back to just poor communication between the federal and state level. Like, I think that probably someone saw something and that wasn't communicated properly, or once it was communicated, then the right authorities weren't provided to shoot the shooter. I think it was just like bureaucracy at its worst, where they're not working well together. Like, I know that the local police was in charge of securing the outer perimeter, so the building on which the shooter was on. And so, but at the same time, the State Department is responsible for approving any kind of plans that the local police have in place to protect the president. So and the local police said, they warned the Secret Service before, they said, we just don't have the manpower to do this. And I don't know if the Secret Service didn't respond to that or what the story was, but the Secret Service are the ones ultimately responsible for the failure. And so I'm just theorizing here. Like, I am not privy to any information that you guys are not privy to. I think it's just a failure on the Secret Service's behalf. I don't think that there's like this large conspiracy theory go. I don't know. I just don't. Especially like knowing what we know about the shooter. Now, if more things come out, oh, he was talking online with someone in Iran, or he has ties to this group, then we might be talking about something different. But it seems to be that this was just like a very disturbed individual that did it.
Speaking about being privy to information, you had a lot at your time in the CIA. How is it that you're now able to publicize the fact that you were a part of the CIA and talk about the operations? Like, is there a level that you have to check things by? I do know that you had to check your book by certain people to make sure that you weren't letting out too much information. Like, where is the line for that? And what's the process like for you to be able to speak about it publicly?
So as long as I'm not speaking about specific operations, so like sources that we recruited, individuals we targeted, specific countries that I went into clandestinely, I kind of know how to talk around a lot of it and still sound somewhat interesting. I don't know. I guess I've been doing it now for a year since my book came out, and I've just gotten pretty good at it, at talking about it without revealing sources and methods or people that I work with or anything like that. Like, you just have to be really secretive about that stuff. But yeah, no, unfortunately, I have not told you guys anything it's all unclassified. So.
When you leave the CIA, is it a process that they make you kind of gradually pull back on what they tell you, or is it just cut and dry, no more information for you, you can't talk about it for 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, well, I can't talk about anything I did ever in my lifetime, like specific operations I was a part of. Yeah, I mean, I can talk about in general terms, but I can't get into the weeds about personalities or people or anything like that. And then like with my book, anytime I write something, yeah, it has to get through the publication review board. And I went through that process with the book. I went through the process with my second book. Like, that's just something that always has to be done. Anytime I write anything about espionage, it has to go through that process.
When we were going to interview you, I put into like a big group chat that I have, hey, everyone, great interview coming up. What would you want to ask an ex-CIA agent, operative? And the immediate response was, oh, ask him this. Everyone was saying, ask him this, see if he did this. And I wrote back, I just clocked at myself and I was like, that's funny that this preconceived idea that everyone is like a middle-aged white man that's in the CIA.
Yep.
I wrote back and said, oh, it's actually a woman. But you were young, you are beautiful, you are obviously highly intelligent. Did you face any uphill battle being a woman in intelligence in the CIA? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I get it online right now. It's this, oh, you must be part of a honeypot operation, or you were part of a honeypot operation, which for those who don't understand what honeypot operation is, like basically where you use sex to get information. And it's just, that's a huge part of why I wrote the book, because I was just so sick of the way women are portrayed as these kind of sexual dominatrixes in TV and movies and books written primarily by men, that our only value is to provide sex for information, that our only value is how we look. And nothing could be further from the truth, especially in counterterrorism, any kind of foreign intelligence collection. The number one thing they tell you when you come in, and they tell men and women this, like, you 100% can never sleep with anyone in this line of work, ever. Yeah, like you will get fired like that.
Which is so funny because it's the opposite to what we're led to believe with thanks to Hollywood.
Yeah.
Like, you think of Angelina Jolie and Mr. and Mrs. Smith, sex bomb, sleeps with whoever she needs to sort of get it. Like, that's the way we're led to believe.
Right.
And then all of a sudden they're saying to you, do not touch anyone.
Yeah, you do not. You do not. I mean, there's so many reasons why. I mean, like, first of all, I would never do it. But then also there's so many reasons why that doesn't work. The Russians do it. The Chinese do it. There are a lot of intelligence organizations that do it. So I can understand why people might think that the CIA is the same way, but it's absolutely not true. I mean, think about where I worked, right? In counterterrorism and the Middle East. If I was going around sleeping with my sources, would anyone respect me? Would anybody put their lives in my hands and say, yeah, here's all this information for your government? No. Like, they need it, especially within that area of the world where they do not see women as their equal. You needed to establish right away who was in charge, the fact that you are here for a professional relationship only. You have everything there is to know about the individual, from their color of, their mom's hair to what their mom used to call him whenever he was a little boy. Like, everything. You go in there armed with information, you call them out on their lies, and you do not play around with like flirting or anything like that. Like, you cannot do that.
But what about interrelations in the CIA? Like, was it a battle for you work-wise within your own colleagues, within your own organization?
Yeah. That also was a little bit of a challenge, but I learned through a lot of my colleagues and friends that I just was never interested in that. My husband's in a totally different line of work. I liked the separation. I liked being able to like come home and like not talk about it, and him to bring something different to the relationship. And there was never like this competitive thing that I saw happening with my female friends that had married within the CIA, because it can really complicate things. It can make things easy because you can go overseas more easily and find jobs more easily. But oftentimes what happens is the men are promoted and the women are not. And so you almost have to decide like whose career is going to take primacy. And it's oftentimes the men. It's still very much a good old boys network where men run the show. And I think a large part of that is because they don't make it easy for moms to do that kind of work. I mean, there are just different requirements on us, whenever we become mothers. It just kind of is the way it is. And so, we go out for maternity leave. The guy doesn't go out for maternity leave. I come back from maternity leave and someone else has got my job, or someone else got that promotion. I was up for a really big promotion right before I left. I was pregnant with our second son. The guy that's doing the exact same work as me, without the reputation that I had for getting the right people, he got it because I swear it was because I was pregnant. And they were like, oh, she needs to like be a mom or whatever. And so, it was really difficult. And then like when I went out to the war zones, I had this one instance that was just nuts. I went to a base, and at the base, they told me there was no more room to stay at the base with the other CIA officers, that I had to stay at another location where all the special forces guys were staying. And I was like, I don't really understand this. Like, you guys have known that I was coming out TDY for months. Like, how can you not have any room for me at the base? And they're like, well, something we've observed is like young female officers love to stay there with the special forces guys because they hook up. And I was like, 100% get me down to base. I am not interested in that. I'm here to do a job. And like, if I started doing that again, how am I going to be respected by people? You almost had to be a bitch, just to stay away from everyone.
It's almost like they weren't doing that for you though. Like, that's like quite backhanded. Yeah. They're not saying, oh, most other women like to stay there. It's saying we're putting you there because the men probably like to have you there. Like, it's the opposite.
Right. I don't want to be there. I don't want to be there at all. Yes, it was gross. It was gross. Yeah. So I got moved down, but I was like, this is absurd, you guys. And then like, I couldn't talk to anybody. Even if you sat next to a man in like the mess hall or whatever, like they automatically assume that you're sleeping with him. So you can't even like sit next or be friends with anyone because they'll just assume you're having sex with them. It was absurd. So I had to be a real bitch, honestly, to like every man, because otherwise they would think, oh, she's whatever.
Then all of a sudden you're a bitch.
Oh, totally. I was about to say, and then you have to suffer the consequences of being the person who's hard to work with. Yeah. Like, it's incredibly reductive. I did have a question about, in your book, again, I don't want to give away too much, but there is a bit of a love story.
Yes.
You said that you weren't allowed to hook up with any of the sources. Are you allowed to hook up with other people within the organization if you want to?
Yeah. But they also told you before you went over to the war zones, you felt like you're in high school again because they brought out like a jar of condoms and they were like, make sure you protect yourself, because there was like an STD outbreak whenever, right before I went over there. Yeah. Because everyone was sleeping with each other. Because with like the war zones, people are stressed out. They're with their spouses.
It's like the Olympic Village.
But there's also totally nothing wrong with that if it's not interrupting anyone's life or the work that they're doing. Like, we're not saying there's anything wrong with that. What there's something wrong with is assuming that that's just what you would want because you're a woman.
Yeah.
That's where I have the issue.
Brittany, since you've left the CIA, you've gone on to be a staunch advocate for women's rights in the Middle East. Was it through your experiences over there that it initiated that passion for you?
Yes. So my last account at the CIA was in Afghanistan, Pakistan, in the Counterterrorism Division. And I was really involved with the Taliban was, trying to gain a foothold again in the country. And, it was a question then with the U.S. government, do we work with the Taliban? Since it's a new leadership, are they any different from the old Taliban that allowed Al-Qaeda to basically train in their country? Or is this the same old type of organization? What I saw consistently was the human rights abuses towards women. Whatever their foreign policy stance, they were very much against women being educated, having any kind of rights or life of their own. And whenever the United States left Afghanistan, I think a lot of other people that worked in the military and intelligence felt really horrible and helpless because we left a lot of people behind, and especially the women. And, all the schools closed, the restrictions were placed on women again about travel. And it's been really hard because we also don't have a same foothold in that country that we used to be able to help women in that country. So we're kind of like in this hard place right now. A lot of the human rights organizations that I've helped that specialize in women's rights, Women for Afghan Women is one of them. And they were really a wonderful organization that had 50 shelters throughout Afghanistan that helped to provide a safe haven for women and children fleeing domestic abuse. And it was wonderful to be a part of those efforts. But since we left Afghanistan, we have no way of really helping those efforts anymore. So it's become more of like kind of a refugee type of organization where we help to reestablish women and children in the United States that are fleeing the Taliban, that are fleeing, human rights abuses. So that work was really inspiring for me because I worked alongside these women who had underwent generations of hardship and civil unrest and human rights abuses, but just refused to be sidelined, refused to stand down, and were so compelling and strong and did not want to be seen as victims. And I think a lot of like how they've been portrayed in the media and movies and stuff, they're portrayed as these victims, helpless victims, but like they're really very, very strong women. And so that's why I created the character I did in the Syndicate Spy, Miriam Al-Sad, because I wanted to showcase this really powerful Arab woman who takes her life into her own hands and really does something for women in that region. Because I'm a strong advocate for, it can't be me, an American woman, going in there and being like, you guys need women's rights. Like, it has to be within their own culture, with their own framework. It has to be those women. And then men too, men, brothers, fathers, standing up beside husbands, standing up beside these women and helping them to fight for their rights.
Well, they do need people like yourself, Americans, coming in to help, and Australians and foreigners, because at the end of the day, what these women are doing is extremely brave and extremely dangerous because they do not have rights and they are silenced from within we've seen it over and over again. Even with Mahsa Amini, we saw what happened with anyone that came and rioted and stood up for her. I can't imagine it's something that you can ever unsee as well once you have gone in there on the ground. Like, it's easy for us to hear about it and to say, oh, we need to help. But when you've seen the things that you've seen on the ground, I imagine it gives you that extra inspiration to be a bit more hands-on.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting because I've talked to a lot of publishers. I'm in the process of trying to get my second book published. And some of the feedback I've gotten is like, people just don't care what's happening with women in the Middle East, Brittany. Like, they just don't care. And I'm like, yes, we do. So I'm just going to keep fighting. I'm just going to keep on trying. But it's just so sad to hear that because I'm like, well, I really think that you're not giving people the benefit of the doubt. I don't think that I think people are more educated than you might think and are paying attention to things like what happened in Iran and would love to see, something like a powerful woman that's changing women's rights in the Middle East showcased. I mean, I'm a big proponent of like I think through literature, poetry, that medium, you can reach a lot of different people that might not be open to the idea of helping to promote women's rights. But maybe if you walk alongside in a fictional story and you read this really inspiring story about an Arab woman, like, you're like, wow, what can I do to help? There's this wonderful organization here in Charleston where it's called Lutheran Services, and they help to provide like furniture and clothing and all these different things for Afghan women that are trying to resettle in the Carolinas. And I've been so happy to be a part of that. But also, like, as I go on the book tour and I talk about my book, I'm also trying to help highlight these organizations that are doing such good work. And people just don't know. They just don't know enough about their work. You know, maybe their social media budget isn't really high. And, you know, just because like I'm out talking about these things. So I'm hoping to shed some light on it and just start a conversation around the issues.
Do you think our perspectives on refugees, particularly for women, fleeing countries like the ones that you experienced firsthand, do you think that they need to shift? Do you think that we have an accurate representation of, firstly, what they're fleeing from and how they're welcomed into our countries?
Yeah, I mean, we're America, right? We're like a land of refugees. So it's so ridiculous. I think sometimes when you hear people, there's this huge border issue thing going on right now. You know, there's this debate about letting immigrants come in, that we need to secure our border. And of course, I'm all about the legal way of getting into the United States. I don't want a bunch of criminals here either, or terrorists or whatever. But I think there's like a balance, and then also realizing where we come from, which is a country of immigrants. I mean, my great grandparents are immigrants. Most people I know, same things. And they were all fleeing something. For me, my ancestors were Irish, and they were fleeing the famine, right? Mm-hmm. So like they didn't have a way of like feeding their families. And so it's the same kind of thing where you're fleeing something, or religious persecution, right? Like the foundation of the United States, like people wanted to be able to worship freely. And they were being persecuted horribly for it in other countries. So they fled to America. So yeah, same thing with, you know, Afghans or Indians or Pakistanis or whoever, is coming into the country. Like, you know, yeah, we don't want any criminals here, but like people who are really fleeing some horrible things and that want to be like contributors to society. It's interesting that like there's this huge focus on Mexico and don't let the Mexicans in and they're criminals. And also like all of the cleaners all over, I know I'm making a huge generalization, but I'll say it anyway. Like they're all Hispanic and they are the hardest working people I have ever met. And like they're building our homes and they're building our streets and they're cleaning our homes. And they're not taking jobs away from white Americans. Like Trump is saying, I don't know. I'm getting a little bit political, but
no, it's like they're enabling you to live the life that you live. And we have this view that they are lesser because they're not born in the same place that we were lucky enough to come out of a uterus.
Right. Exactly.
Brittany, a question a lot of people had is there ever a time in your relationship, so when you were engaged or married, that you are allowed to bring people into your world and actually tell them what you were doing? And if so, what does that look like? You know, sign their life away on a non-disclaimer. Or is it something that you are told they can never fully know until you leave?
So I see that as two kind of separate questions. So one, I could tell my now spouse that I worked at the CIA once we were engaged. I could tell him a little bit more about where I worked exactly and what exactly I was doing. And just in terms of like, I'm working in operations, I'm helping to catch terrorists. Like that's as broad and that's as in the weeds as I got with him. Same thing with anybody else that I could tell, like my mom and my dad. Like you can tell your mom and your dad. They encourage you, you know, to keep it a secret from as many people as you can, because the more people to know, the more inclined it is that they're going to blow your cover. And working clandestinely, like I really didn't want anyone to know that I worked there. Now it's a bit different because I'm not doing that work anymore. I don't have access to the information. So I could be a little bit more free about like talking like, yeah, I used to work there. But again, not getting into any kind of operational details.
Question about the logistics. When we travel, we go to the airport, we go through customs or whatever it is, we land in the country, you open up your passport, you get a little stamp on it and you might pay a visa. How does it work when you're flying to places like Afghanistan?
So we had private planes at that time that would take us. So my husband actually took me to the airport once. This is like one of the first deployments I went on when we were together. We were just dating. And he pulled up, so the Dulles Airport in Virginia, there's like a huge terminal and there's all these planes taking off from there. And he pulled up to the front and I was like, no, it's actually not right here. You have to like go around back. And he was like, go around back? What do you mean? And so he drove around back and like there's like an unmarked plane and I just like walk into it and go. And so it's not like
He's like, what the? Did he know at this point? Was he like?
Yeah, he was like, he knew I was going to the Middle East. He didn't know where exactly. But yeah, that was nerve wracking for him and like really weird. He would like, after I got back home, he was like, don't ever do that to me again. He was just scared. It wasn't like, don't ever go again. Because he knew, like, it's funny. My dad actually said to him once, like, I can't believe you let her go and do this. It's so dangerous. And he was like, have you ever met your daughter? Like, I'm not going to ever tell her what to do.
Speaking of your dad, you mentioned earlier that your dad had sort of advised you against going into this work, against going into the organization because they were all corrupt. Now that you're on the outside and you've done it, you've got your dad's experience, you've got your own personal experience. What is your view on the level of corruption?
I don't know. Did I use the word corrupt?
Yeah.
If I did, I apologize. That was the wrong word. I think more bureaucratic, like just the bureaucracy is just so slow moving and it's really hard to get things done. And I don't know. I think it's getting better. I think that they're trying to cut through a lot of red tape, but it can be very frustrating when like, you're like, okay, as the targeting officer on the ground, you're like, I found this guy that's really, really bad and wants to, kill Americans. Can we get him, please? Can we get him? He's right here. He's right here. He's going to move. He's going to move. He's going to move. And they're like, well, wait, we have to get this approval and then that approval and then la, 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 la. That could be like really like you want to like pull your hair out.
Then all of a sudden he's gone.
And then he's gone and he's like, the opportunity is missed and who knows where he is now and where he's attacking next. So yeah, like there was a lot of those kind of moments where I could see from my dad's perspective, like, yeah, this is really frustrating. It's so much out of your control. And for all those instances where that happens, there's that one instance where you're part of this operation where you get this really bad guy and you're like, I feel great. This is awesome. To be a part of this mission, all these different people working together, something that Hollywood never highlights, which is that it's not one James Bond or Jason Bourne like saving the world. It is many committed individuals with lots of different trade crafts. You've got your signals analyst, you've got your comms expert, you've got your geospatial analyst, you've got your linguist, you have all these people working together to put together an operation. And when it all works beautifully, it's like awesome. And then you have your cake.
And then you have your cake.
Then you eat your terrorist cake. Wow.
I love so much that your rebellion was joining the CIA. Ours was like going out and hooking up with boys and like dating people that our parents wouldn't have approved. It's so funny to me. But Brittany, I've seen on social media that you have written your second book. What's kind of like next for you?
Yeah, I got my second book written. So we'll see what happens with that. If I stay in the spy thriller genre or if I move on to another genre. I've actually started dabbling in a little bit of romantasy. Romance fantasy is like really taking off right now.
We here call it cliterature on Life Uncut.
What do you call it?
We call it cliterature. Cliterature.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Love it. I love reading it. So I was like, I'm going to try to write this. And it's actually a lot easier to write than what I was writing before. So I'm having a lot of fun with it. And the real reason why is like, so spy thriller genre in the US is male dominated. Like all the authors are male. Most of the readers are male. So it's been really difficult for me, honestly, to break in to that genre because I do think that the female perspective needs to get out there. And I was really excited to be able to do it. But I think it's taking a chance on something new. Like you just don't see a lot of females writing in this space. And you also don't see a lot of female CIA officers being showcased in an accurate way. So But like I'm making my book is really fun and there's like sex scenes in it. They're really spicy and like, I mean, it's a really fun read. So it's not too serious. I think sometimes, you might think, oh, it's a spy thriller. I don't want to like use my brain. I want to just like check out, which like I totally get too. Like you want to just like be able to lose yourself because we all deal with real life crap every day. And who wants to like sit and study for a couple hours at the end of the day? So it's definitely one of those books that like you can grab a glass of wine and because that's what I like to do.
Well, that is The Syndicate Spy for everyone that wants to know more. It's a wonderful mix where fact meets fiction. And hopefully we see book 2. We're going to put in the show notes links to Brittany's TikTok and Instagram and the book, etc. So if you do want to know more, I love perusing your page. Like the insight that I get watching all your reels, truly fascinating. So we cannot thank you enough for giving us your insight, your intelligence, your beauty, and your time today, Brittany.
Of course. Thank you guys so much. Thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.